I'd like to extend my gratitude, firstly, to the Executive Director of the National Pre-Law Initiative and say thank you very much, Evangeline. I think that it's been my great fortune, actually, to receive the Legacy Award from the Pre-Law Conference and the Hall of Fame Award last year in Atlanta, Georgia. Let me just say this to you. I never started out to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a dentist. Actually, I wanted to be a dentist. But then I realized that I had the great opportunity my second year in undergrad school to work for one of the few African-American endocrinologists in the country, a PhD graduate of Purdue at Texas Southern University, who was my professor, who actually I became his histologist with a grant that we did the precursor to the heart transplant. Now that dates me, I know. Yes, I came out of law school in 1970. But let me just say this to you. It was the greatest experience in life. We did two things. Number one, it actually conditioned me for the discipline of law school, but it also conditioned me to understand that I really didn't like the lab, and therefore I would probably have made a terrible dentist. But the thing is that I learned 20 years later from that same professor at a Christmas party, who said to me, say, Crump, you know what? Say, when you were my lab assistant, you were probably one of the best histologists that I had ever had in undergrad school. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that then? He said, because I knew you would ask me for a raise. And he was quite right. That was Dr. Sadler, who actually ended up being one of the big chairman of the science department at Howard in his later years. But let me just say this to you. What that did for me was actually, in addition to what happened, when you work in the lab, and I can tell you this because everybody here is like, you understand this. When you work in the lab and you live in the frat house, you actually know that when you're a histologist, there's something in the lab that you have that's called ethanol. And that's what you use to do all the tissue through for all the different stages, which is 26 stages when you're processing tissues to make slides. And the way you actually, one of the fringe benefits of it is that the fact of it is if you take, if you work in a lab 3 days a week, and you have a little 25 milliliter flask that you take and pour in the big jar in the frat house, at the end of a month, you got quite a bit of ethanol. And so therefore, when you have the frat parties, you had enough ethanol to go around. I just say I just say that to you in all sincerity. But the other piece was that what I found out after I said that I was a sports editor of the school paper, and at the time, Texas Southern University had one of the best track teams in the world. The 440, the 880. Yolanda Adams' father actually anchored the 880 for us. And the coach was Coach Wright, who actually ended up coaching in the Olympics, and actually ended up in Germany where they gave him the wrong time, and actually ended up having to sue Howard Cosell and ABC News to the tune of $3.5 million. Now, the whole thing about that is that while I was when I was searching after, I figured I really didn't like the lab. I didn't know where I was going, so I went to talk to the dean of the School of Journalism because I was a sports editor. And actually he says to me, because I was going to transfer into journalism, and he said, because I'd had the opportunity, the exposure then to travel with the track team, and actually I led it because they give at that time, I don't know what they still do it in undergrad school, but they gave all the people who led it a sweater, and we were the Flying Tigers, and I had TSU Press on my sweater. That's too little for me to wear now. But that was a great time. But it opened up a lot of avenues for me, because I grew up in Texas, and actually you don't have that much exposure at the time that I came through, because I came before integration, and I would say I was born too soon, born before the Yellow Pages, and therefore what happened is that it opened up a lot of ideas for me and things of what could be done. As a matter of fact, I never shall forget the night when Johnson signed the 64 Civil Rights Act. We went around to a number of the clubs around Rice University and all places, just testing to see if they would let us in. But all of that was an experiential factor that gives you a whole different connotation of what the world is about. And I say that to you because what happened is that every individual that I know that has been successful has failed at something. And I say that because I start every time I'm speaking to a group, I always start out with Columbus by Joaquin Miller. Now we know that Columbus didn't discover America. Indians were already here, Native Americans that is. And so therefore what happened is, but one of the things, the challenges with that whole piece is the fact that he says to you to sail on, mean keep on pushing, because I grew up with the impressions, right? And therefore what happened is that whatever happened to you, push forward again. And so that's why I start out with that, because in Texas, when I was coming up, they had what was called junior and senior declamation in the Scholastic League. And I thought I was very good, and in fact, a lot of people say I was. But the fact is that before you would go to the state championship, you had to go through, you have the whole audience of the whole school, high school, in an audience just like you sit down. And you had to give your whole speech before them. And lo and behold, I walked up there and I started out with Columbus by Joaquin Miller, and one of my classmates was in the back. And one of the things they teach you when you're speaking, public speaking, is never concentrate on the audience, concentrate on what you got to say. And of course, I had a lapse moment, and I forgot the rest of my speech. And of course, what I do, I ran off stage. And so I recite that every time I get up, as most of you who have ever been to one of these before, you know I do. Because what happened is that reminds me of concentrate on what you have to say and not what others are thinking you ought to say. And so that's what I do all the time. And so everybody asks, so why do you cite Joaquin Miller's Columbus? And I say, because it says, the good mate said, now must we pray, for lo, the very stars are gone. The captain said, sail on, sail on, sail on and on. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want all of you to be able to sail on and make sure that you make your own path to whatever it is that you want to do, because whatever you start out with may not be the definitive end. As I say to people all the time, I said, do you realize that half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are lawyers, but you would never know it? And so therefore, because what happened is the law degree gives you so many different kinds of opportunities to participate in this society that you need to know early on, and law gives that basis for you. Now, as it relates to the whole law camp, the law camp was a dream of mine, and let me just say for background purposes, we have graduated over 600 students out of the law camp. As a matter of fact, our next class starts on June 26th here at Howard University. This was a dream of mine. I was on a plane with a medical doctor sitting next to him, and he says to me, he was coming here to interview students for their intern program. These are high school students, because they wanted to put them through the 3612 to see how they hold up. Because under the original piece that the doctors are complaining about now, the new doctors that is, you know, when you're doing your internship, you're on 3612. You're on 36 hours and you're off for 12. And they were selecting students to actually participate in that program from high school students, science students. And that gave me an idea. There's nothing like that in the legal profession. So my deputy at the time, I was executive director of the National Bar, and we were sitting there and I said, you know what? I want to start a camp for high school kids that actually may be interested in law. We don't really care whether they go into law or not. We want to grow lawyers, but more importantly, we want to build character. And so with that, we sat down and I say, you know, at the time, as executive director, I had a big relationship with all of the hotel in the country because we do business with them in terms of conventions, conferences, meetings. And I say, you know, there are nobody at resorts in the summer. So what if I could get them to let me have the place for the summer for 2 weeks to bring in kids? And so we sat there and we said, you know, that sounds like a great idea. Let's run it up the flagpole. So we ran it up the flagpole. At that time, some of the bar powers that be said, well, we really don't want to do it. We want to make it. We want to associate it with an educational institution, so we can make sure that they get the whole experience of the campus and everything, because these are high school kids, which makes sense. And so then we went to Ford Motor Company, not the foundation, but Ford Motor Company. They bought the idea, and they gave me $500,000 in 2001 to set the program up. We set the program up. It's a 2-week program. They get the whole campus experience, and actually they participate in the mock trial, but they get the whole idea of what the campus experience is about. Now, these are rising 9th graders through rising 11th graders. What that does is condition you, because I remember the first time that I was on the campus, I say, I like this. Because what happened is, as you all know, what happened is if you get to campus, live in a dormitory, it's the first time away from home, and you don't have no chaperone. Nobody tells you when to go to bed. You got to develop your own discipline factor. And that discipline factor actually carries you throughout the whole process of your career. Because as your mom told you a long time, you've been the sapling while it's young, wait, I must have missed it. You've been the sapling while it's young, and it would never veer from that whole piece. So that's paraphrasing, really. So therefore, what happened is they set up and they said, well, we'd like for you to associate it with Howard University because we already have a relationship with them. So they gave me a $500,000 for 3 years to do the camp. So this is starting on June 26th will be our 16th year. Over 600 kids have come through the program. More importantly, the last stats I have, we had 48 individuals. Now, mind you, that means we have to stay in touch with them from rising 9th graders all the way through high school. Then they got to get into undergrad school. They got to get into law school. We now have 48 lawyers, our last count, who actually have come through the Crump Law Camp. So I'm very proud of that. And so therefore, we know a little bit about growing lawyers. And so therefore what happens is that these individuals, it's really amazing. All over the country. I've been into, there were individuals who were in hospitality programs. I actually have been in a restaurant and they come and they bring the check back, bring me the check and say, Mr. Crump, thank you very much for your support here. And I said, wait a minute, how do you know me? And they say, I came through your Crump Law Camp. And I am now in the hospitality industry, and we are rotating through the restaurants and the whole process. So anyway, it's a very, very good feeling for it, and it's all worthwhile. the fact of the matter is that when you really look at it, as I said to one of my, I ran into the father of one of the individuals who came through the camp about 3 years ago, who actually at that time she wanted to be a model, and she had been in Miss DC pageant or whatever. And he was trying to talk her in out of not going into that whole process, because that's like the chicken and feathers, right? I mean, you have chicken one day and feathers the next. But the fact is that she came in the program, and I said, what we do is we actually change lives. She graduated from Hampton last year with a 3.8 average. And actually I got to find out now why she wants to go to law school, because what happened is that at that time she may be in by now, but I don't know, because I haven't seen the parents leave. But anyway, I say that to you because what happens is that this is the experience, this is the whole piece that I love to talk about, because it's a passion of mine in terms of the whole process. But in addition to that, if you look at it, I look at it because I look at my whole being. You know, I told you about the lab piece, and then I got into law. I went to work for NASA out of undergrad school as a computer operator. Was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was a computer operator at NASA in Building 30, which is mission control. And during that whole process, the 2.5 years that I was there, I had a chance. There are 6 stations around the country that does tracking for every time they send up a space mission. And at that time, every time there was a space mission, we go out 3 weeks before to do what we call system runs. And system runs meaning that you're checking all the computers for all the problems that could occur. My first major trip was to Australia. Now, I'm 23 years old. I'm going to Australia. That's another day when you get there. I mean, and so that was happening at 23 years old. I happened to meet on the Cunard come back, because Apollo 11 was a good mission, and they let us take the Cunard back to England and then fly back to the U.S. I met a lady on there who was a very wealthy lady who actually, I was out by the pool. The Cunard had about 4,000 people on it. I was the only one on there that looked like me. And so therefore I'm out by the pool, and she says, what are you doing on here? And she didn't mean any harm, because this was her 3rd trip around the world, because her kids put her on that because they didn't want to be bothered with it, because on the Cunard, which is a first-class cruise ship, you got all the doctors and everything else that you need, so they could put her on that sail around the world for 180 days, and they didn't have to worry about it. So she said, well, so I said, I'm with NASA, and I happen to, we just had a successful mission, and they let us take this back. She said, oh, really? Said, now you have to look at the timing on this now. She said, this was about 1968. She said, you're going to be my escort at the captain's table tonight. And I said, well, thank you very much, but I can't do that. She said, why not? I said, because to go to the captain's table, you have to have a tuxedo. I don't have one. She said, well, we'll remedy that. She picks up the phone, she calls the haberdasher, and she says, I'm sending a young man down to be fitted for a tuxedo, because he's my he's escort tonight at the captain's table. And I said, he said, I guess he said okay, because then she hung up. And then she called him back and said, and by the way, he's black. Well, she wanted to make sure he didn't have any problems with it, because she didn't want to make sure I wasn't down there saying the guy needed a tuxedo and he's going to pay for it, right? But anyway, For the next, there's a 21-day trip from Sydney, Australia, back to England, to London. And so for the next 19 days, I was this 73-year-old lady's escort at the captain's table. Well, that's the good thing, because what happened is that was a marvelous point, because in the end, I got to meet her kids and everything. She flew me that following Thanksgiving up to Boston to actually, for Thanksgiving. And then, after I got out of law school, I'm sitting at my desk one morning. At that time, I was working for legal services in St. Louis, Missouri. And she said, and I get a phone call and said, "You John Crump?" And last time I checked. And he said, "You need to be here for the reading of the will. I just want to make sure I had the address and thing for you to send you the ticket." Well, she left me $25,000 in 1972 money. Because I was just a good escort. But anyway, I mean, and I'm saying to you that it was all in good faith, and she did a good job, and a wonderful person. And that was the first time. The second time it happened to me based on an individual who actually in Houston, who was vice president, who was CEO, chairman of the board of at that time, the Texas largest bank. And actually, I waited tables in this club where he came all the time, which he probably held a mortgage on. And then sometimes he would have more libations that was necessary for him to drive, and he would ask me to drive him home, and I didn't mind, because that was $50 in 1967 and 68 money. And so therefore, what happened is the same thing happened to him, and he upped it by any. But I got 35 from him. So God is good. So anyway, I always relate that to you, because this morning I heard a young lady say, who was speaking, to say, make as many contacts as you can, and you never know who the stakeholders are going to be, who have a stakeholder in your future in terms of the whole process. So it has been very good to me, because it happens all the way back to the whole piece. So somebody said to me, say, "Crump, I think you have a karma." I said, "Well, I hope it keeps up." But the fact of the matter is that it has so far. Now, I came to Washington as a Joint Center for Political Studies fellow from St. Louis, Missouri. And what happens is that I ended up here as one of the Congressional Black Caucus at the time had 13 members. We call them the Dirty Dozen plus one. And what happened is that the Joint Center was set up by an individual named Reeves, who was building on 14th and you was named for, who had been at Howard Law School, who was a White House aide under Kennedy. And therefore what happened is, when he left the White House, actually they got the money from the Ford Foundation for him to set up the first black think tank in the country, which still exists. As a matter of fact, the president now is a law professor from GW, George Washington University. But actually, it paid me twice as much money as I was making with legal services, so I came to Washington. And lo and behold, I was assigned to the mayor of Washington, D.C. as a special assistant before Home Rule. And most of you don't know what Home Rule is. Up until 1974, D.C., the mayor of D.C. was appointed by the president, and it was called mayor commissioner. And therefore what happened is that Johnson appointed Walter Washington as the mayor and said, "Mayor commissioner, I want you to, whatever you do, just, you are the mayor." And this was before Home Rule. So I was assigned to him, and I always say that the mayor had two flunkies, one opening the door and one closing them. And said, and my night to open them. So I opened the mayor. So I started writing speeches for the mayor, and the thing that endured me to him was the fact that one evening, as we were about to go to a place where he was going to speak, I had given him a speech about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he looked at it and he liked it. And then we're in the car, we're going down, and he said, "Oh my God, I left my speech." And at that time, I said, I learned a long time. I had another one. I had a copy in my pocket. I said, "Mr. Mayor, I have a copy." After that, he had me move in the office next door to him. And so therefore, he didn't make a move without calling, "Where's Crump?" And so that, but you know, it worked out, because what happened is that you never know where things lead, is what I'm really saying. And but you know, but opportunity, when opportunity presents itself, you have to be able to take advantage of it. And that's the piece that I wanted to leave with you tonight. But the whole piece as it relates to the Bar Association opened up so many doors for me. I went there to stay a year. As a matter of fact, when the then president called me, I was with the mayor of the city of Houston at the time, and he says to me, "How you like to be the executive director of the bar?" I say, "Oh man, no, I don't think so." He said, "Well, get your resume over to me." He said, the current exec just left us, and we don't have anybody. And I've got a whole convention coming up." And he said, now, the good thing was, the then president had been my adjunct professor when I was in law school. We never got along. Matter of fact, I sat on the front seat, and I always told him when he given the case. Now, he was a good lawyer, but I was kind of a radical to some extent. I said, I used to say, "Mr. McDonald, with all due respect, that's not how I read the case." And of course, he would say, "Well, I'm telling you what it is." But so it was really with some shock that when I get a call from him asking me whether or not, that means he liked the adversity that I created for him, right? And so therefore, what happened is that you never know. You can't be able to. I meet so many people who actually now don't agree but don't say anything. And sometimes you got to speak up, because what happened is people sometimes are testing you to see whether or not, you don't have to agree with them. They don't care whether you agree with them or not. I always say the best staff people that I had in my 30 years as executive of the bar was the people who actually sometimes controverted 75% of whatever my directions were. But the fact of it is, I say, because if you're going to be that, if you're going to controvert most of the stuff that I say, then you must be good. Because what happened is, I'm going to hold you to it if it doesn't work. And so therefore, I think that that's what I always like to say that to people, because what happened is, I'm not one of those people. Decorum is one thing. Quietly passive is another. And I don't think that quietly passive does anything for you, because one of the things that I think a law degree does for you is create what I call independent thinkers. And therefore what happened is that we're hoping that all of you become what I refer to, and futuristically will continue to refer to, as independent thinkers. Thank you very much.